week 2 of humility. I love to read. I'm a reader. Have been since I was a little girl. My parents would tuck me into bed, and I would legit hide the flashlight. Anyone out there that did that under the covers? And you just keep reading through the night. And your mom's like, "Why are you so tired? You went to bed early." You're like, "You don't even know what happened. The babysitter club. There was some drama." But yeah, I love to read. I'm now in my 4th decade of life, and so because of that, I'm a collector. I have 4 very full bookshelves that even have them stacked on top. It's not very glamorous look in my home, but out of all the books, and mind you, I have been in ministry for a while, and I am very much love Christian leadership, Christian development. I also love some mystery and some fantasy novels, if you know what I mean. But my bookshelves, these are the only 2 books on humility. And it's because it's a subject that you can't BS about. You either have humility or you don't. There's not a lot of fluff around the topic of humility. And so as a church, we're doing like a church book study, you can say. And so these are for sale out in the lobby. We're not making a penny, you guys. They're the same cost that they would be on Amazon, except instead of waiting for Prime, it's right out there. So there's a couple more copies out there. But what I love about this particular book is it was written by a professor, a Christian professor in Australia. And he approaches the subject of humility, humilitas, from a cognitive viewpoint of it. He literally lays out the history of it and how literally Jesus was the first person to ever walk in humility on our earth. And so I thought I would open today by sharing a story of when I did not walk in humility. You see, Daniel and I, when we moved to the area, it was the year 2012, and prior to that, I had been living in Los Angeles for around 6 years, and I had spent my time in Los Angeles in fine dining. Now, when I say fine dining, I mean fine dining where you've got all the silverware, all the glassware, where I have an assistant, and our regulars are people like Joe Montana. Joe Rogan would come in on Tuesday nights. It's been a decade, so all the people are like not as cool as the young ones right now. But it was very normal for celebrities to come in, professional athletes, government officials. We even had Christian celebrities come in that would be touring and visiting at different churches. And so I was living in a culture that was obsessed with what they were producing, right? You move to LA for a couple of reasons. What? To get famous in acting, dance, or music, or producing of sorts, but it's all about you, right? And so when you meet someone, you don't hesitate to let them know what your resume is, because this could be your next job booking or your next collab, right? And so in this industry that I was working in, I ended up getting hired on by this restaurant that was just opening. And I became the lead server. And our restaurant won the Zagat for Best New Restaurant in Los Angeles. We knew winemakers by their first name. World-renowned winemakers from Europe and from all over the West Coast. No offense, East Coast wine, but there's another story there, okay? So when I moved here to New York, to upstate northern New York, and got a job at the local steakhouse, I brought my resume and confidence with me. I've got to tell you that the way that I entered the job, the owner of the establishment was very excited about my skill set. In fact, this is how he introduced me to all of his crew, which, mind you, some of them had been with him for over 20 years. He said, "Ladies, this is Daniela. She's from Los Angeles, and she's going to teach you all about wine." It did not set me up for success. It was one of the longest 2.5 years of my life. I never recovered from the way that I started at the job. It was so bad that in a 1.5 years later down the road, while I am pregnant and my husband is deployed and it's the middle of winter, my coworkers could not stand me. Every time the owners would go out of town, which was a lot during the winter down to Florida, my coworkers would put me in the furthest section away from the kitchen. Mind you, I'm like 8 months pregnant during all of this. Whenever I would finally get a large table, which is where you make all of your money, they would literally whisper amongst themselves, "Don't help her, that way she won't get big tables anymore." It was rough. And here's the thing. Even still now, when I run into old coworkers, I cringe inside because there was a lost opportunity with sharing the love of Jesus directly. It would take a lot for them to be able to see who Jesus was just simply by my first month on the job. Humility makes way in relationships. Humility literally can transform your leadership in every sphere of your life, whether you are in the military, whether you are in government, whether you are teaching in grade schools. Whatever job you have, humility will set you up for success. Humility will also heal your marriage and give you the relationship that you've always dreamed of. And humility is the key ingredient to raising healthy kids that you will want to be around once they've left your home. And so let's dive in a little bit more about what humility is. Okay, so a little bit of a backdrop. And we learn about this in the book, but I'm going to go a little bit more into detail. Caesar Augustus was the emperor at the time of Christ. And so here's a bust that Caesar actually had commissioned for himself. During this time in our culture, it was an honor-shame culture. It was all about honor. Even though, like, the Spartans were, like, early BC, I want you to think, this is Sparta, right? Like, you just threw all of yourself out. It was all about honor. In fact, it's even said that if there was an affair in your marriage, the biggest tragedy was the shame it brought on you, not the break of trust in your relationship. Like, that's the reality of what the culture was. And so our boy Caesar here, he wrote a page called, not really a page, it was more like a document called The Achievements of the Divine Augustine. He wrote this about himself. He penned it in first person, and this was totally normal for his time. This is not out of the blue or random. He penned these 35 things that he had accomplished in his lifetime, and he had it put into bronze and displayed on the outside of his monument that he had set up. And he even had additional copies made and sent throughout the empire where he was ruling. So I'm going to read you a couple of our Caesar Augustus accomplishments. Number 1. At the age of 19, on my own responsibility and at my own expense, I raised an army with which I successfully championed the liberty of the republic when it was oppressed by the tyranny of the fraction. On that account, the Senate passed decrees in my honor, enrolling me in its order and the consulship of Gaius Pannius Olorius Hertorius. Just read with confidence and it makes it right, okay? Number 10. My name was inserted in the hymn of the Saul by a decree of the Senate, and it was enacted by law that my person should be irrevocable forever, and that I should hold the tribute and power for the duration of my life. What that means is that we're supposed to always remember his name forever, and we can't forget it. My personal favorite one is this one, number 25. I made the sea peaceful and freed it of its pirates. In the war, I captured about 30,000 slaves who had escaped from their masters and taken up arms against the Republic, and I handed them over to their masters for punishment. Literally, in this 35-point document, he marks out every single military victory he was a part of, every public award that he had received, gifts that the city actually gave him in thanks for his great service, all the building projects that he was a part of, the civic games like the gladiator tournaments that he held, and so on and so on, even like who his family was, like proving how great he was down to his bloodline, right? There was nothing left probably that he did not share. What's important for us to recognize that as we're reading this was totally accepted. This was totally normal behavior. This is not like that guy you're going to meet at the Christmas party in a couple of weeks that's just like telling you all about how great he is and you're just wanting to roll your eyes and get more meatballs. Like, this is the society that they were living in. And it's what's incredible is it gives us a glimpse. Like, his catalog of his emperorship is actually a glimpse, historical records used to measure timelines and histories, right? It's a factual document that they look at to help tell their history and stuff. And so, you know, as cringy as it is, it's not very far off from where we're kind of still at today. You know, Instagram just recently released, they said that 34 billion selfies are loaded every year. Every year, 34 billion. In fact, selfies are becoming the fastest dumb way to die. It's growing in the fastest dumb way to die. And at the Grand Canyon, they now have to post signs that say, don't take a selfie on the edge, because a couple weeks ago, literally 4 people fell in attempting a selfie. And so here we are in the middle of traffic, our backs up against a raging river, in the middle of an ocean on a paddleboard, leaning over a tall building, all in the name of a good selfie. Literally, there's over 536 deaths that have been documented because of a selfie. For giving us a little perspective, a litmus test here, you are more likely to die of taking a selfie than you are by a shark attack. That's crazy. It's crazy. Now listen, I'm not against a good selfie because, man, when the lighting's there, capture the picture. But it kind of shows this point that although we're not outwardly boasting about our lives, that essence is still here. Now, I want to just remind you that Caesar Augustus was literally in leadership when Jesus Christ was born. Jesus was so opposite of all leaders that had ever been before him. What made him opposite, even down to like his genealogy that he has listed in the book of Matthew. I love every Christmas to go through and read the birth of Christ's story, but when you look at his birth alone, I mean, it's fulfilling over hundreds of prophecies from the Old Testament. But in his family line are some messed up people I might not mention, like Tamar, who dressed up as a prostitute and tricked her father-in-law into sleeping with her, right? Or how about Rahab, the prostitute? Or even a refugee. Jesus, he let it all out and showed that the glory of God can come in all family lines as long as we're submitted to him. And so Jesus himself, I want you to think about how humble that is. When you think about the God of the universe in the most vulnerable state in a baby's body, Jesus never wrote one word about himself. There's no 2,500-page document. There's no marble bust that was commissioned by his choice or by others to may look like him. Like, still to this day, we don't really know exactly what he looks like. We have an idea of what he could look like. The King of all kings. And yet Jesus didn't do that. Instead, what do we see about Jesus? We see Jesus showing up at a well in Samaria. Instead, where most Jews would take a longer route to avoid the Samaritans, he went right to the heart of their city in the heat of the day because he knew he had an appointment with a woman at the well. Not only did he meet her in all of her situation, he spoke to her with such dignity and love that she was restored in relationship with Jesus, and she became the very first evangelist, later leading the rest of her town into relationship with Jesus. We see Jesus walking down the road on a mission. He's going somewhere with his disciples, and a blind man, probably eccentric, starts shouting out, "Jesus of Nazareth!" And he stops, he pivots, he has a conversation with the man, and he heals him. And literally, I want you to remember, honor and shame culture. When someone had something like blindness, society had to label it. And so it says, the disciples said, "Why was this man blind? Was it the sin of his parents?" And Jesus is like, "No. This man is blind to show the glory of God." We see Jesus when a bunch of Pharisees throw a woman caught in the act of adultery. Let's just think about how humbling this is. What's the act of adultery? Don't go there all the way. We're in church. We need to keep focusing. But you're probably not wearing much, and you were literally thrown out in the streets in front of a bunch of other men that are judging what you're doing. Who knows what the circumstances were? What does Jesus do? Doodles in the sand. He says, "You could cast the first stone if you're without sin." One by one, the stones drop, and they take off, and he looks at the woman, and he says, "And neither do I condemn you. Rise up and sin no more." We see Jesus use his power and authority to serve others. It reminds us of our definition of humility that we talked about last week. It says this: we define humility. It is the noble choice to forgo your status, deploy your resources, and use your influence for the good of others before you. Or simply put, a humble person is marked by a willingness to hold power in the service of others. I love the Apostle Paul. He tells us in 2 Corinthians verse 12 and 9, he says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me." There's this story in the New Testament in a couple of Gospels. This thing actually happened 3 times that we know about it because it was written down 3 different times. But the disciples are literally caught arguing about who the greatest is. How awkward is that? Who the greatest is. We're going to see one of the accounts we're going to read here in a second. But out of the 2 situations, 2 of them, he invites a child to come and sit with them. And he models what that looks like. And so we're going to read about this in Mark chapter 9, verse 33. It says this: "They came to Capernaum when he was in the house, but he asked them, 'What were you arguing about there on the road?'" Now, I want to pause just to let you know what they were talking about. They had just left. They just watched Jesus set a child who was Basically, he was demonic. He had influence of demons. He got exorcised. There's your Halloween story for you. It's found in the book of Mark. Jesus sets this young child free. So you think they'd have a lot to talk about, right? Like, that's a crazy situation right there, that Jesus had just walked someone into mental and spiritual freedom, okay? No, but they're arguing, and they shut down, but they kept quiet because on the way, they had argued about who was the greatest. It's amazing. In all three occurrences, Jesus does not get upset at them. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't freak out about how ridiculous this whole concept is. It kind of actually reminds me, when I was in my pastoral internship in my early 20s, I was in a program, and we were learning about humility, as we were reading our little Andrew Murray book right there. And, it's funny, in the church, we do a false sense of humility, right? In the world, they boast about their stuff on the outside, but here in the church, we're like, oh, it's like, I don't know if I'm a good communicator. If God wants to use me, maybe he will. Oh, I love to sing. It's so cringy. I'm going to stop myself before going into the details. I'm just tell you that in the 20s, you're out to prove yourself, even when you're in ministry training. So here I am with a bunch of my peers. And everyone's trying to prove that they're the greatest, right? They have the best anointing, which is just power of God moving on your life. Their best skill set that's going to make the biggest impact in the world. Because in your 20s, you're all about trying to prove yourself in comparison to others. In your 30s, you climb a ladder, and in your 40s, you just kind of get over it because you've got so much else going on, and you just kind of accept who you are. I can't wait to get 50 and 60, 70, 80, because it just keeps getting better, right? But in my 20s, surrounded by all of these other Christian leaders, getting ready to be sent out to be the new pastors and church planters of the United States of America, are a bunch of proud young children. And our leader, our pastor, saw this on us, and he said, we're going to do a little exercise today on humility. We're going to go worship for 5 minutes. And we're like, great! Worship's perfect because it's our chance to show how much we're really surrendered to God. You've got some people that will lay on the floor and just start crying. You've got other people that were like, they'll show you how big their wingspan is in worship. It's this kind of a setting, right? And so literally, we get into the sanctuary, and he's like, all right, we're going to worship for 5 minutes. We're like, 5 minutes? Okay, sure. We show you what you got. And he's like, without any music, and we're going to dance the whole time before the Lord. Dance for your peers, no music for the Lord. Now, I don't know about you, but in my 20s, especially in ministry training, I'm looking for my husband, right? Like, who'll he be in this room? We're all kind of in that state of mind. And so you not only is it your pride, you care about what other people are thinking. And so here we are in a room dancing for 5 minutes. I got to tell you, it was uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable, because what do? I bring the sacrifice of prayer. Jesus, oh God, I love you. I should have worn more deodorant than this. This is too early. Where's the you're going through it. You're trying, so I'm all in. But let's be honest, have you ever done aerobics? If you go all out for 5 minutes, that's not it. You get tiring, right? Something happens around 3 minutes in, right? Your pride's down, your exhaustion is evident, and you refocus. What am I even doing? I am entering into worship. I am focusing on who Jesus is, and I'm literally physically stepping into an uncomfortable place amongst my peers to show him that he's worthy. Isn't that the whole point of worship, right? Isn't worship where we're just telling God who he is to us? And yet so often we come in and we're trying to impress other people around us, or we're trying to quiet our lives of I'm here because I got to check this box, but really I should be at Sam's Club to get my order, or I need to go to the dry cleaners today to pick up, whatever it may be. And you're running through a list of things. Worship is stopping and putting God in the rightful place in our lives. It's amazing. One of the craziest things that Jesus did on the night before he was crucified. You had one night with the people that you loved. Wouldn't you think the conversation was really important? Wouldn't you be trying to say, what you want them to remember you by, right? So we find Jesus here. It's actually, we're going to look in the book of John chapter 13. I'm not that holy. My dog just likes the way my sweaty hands smell, apparently, because here's my Bible all chewed up right now. All right. First service laughed at that. I guess you don't find me as funny, but that's fine. All right, Jesus. All right, chapter 13, verse 1. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He now showed the disciples the full extent of his love. Skipping down to verse 3. Jesus knew that his Father had given him authority over everything and had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, and wrapped a towel around his waist. I don't know about you, but when I've read this story my whole life, or I've heard this, I just kind of assumed that, because they're kind of at a restaurant. You know, they've rented this space to have the Passover supper. Jesus sent part of his disciples forward to prepare this meal for them. And so I always thought there was a servant that washed everyone's feet when they came in off the streets. Or if it was kind of one of those things that's like, okay, it's your turn to do the dishes tonight, right? And Jesus is like, I'm up tonight. Tonight's my turn to wash feet. But that's not what took place. It says that Jesus was seated already at the table, and he got up, and he wrapped the towel around his waist. So he's really wanting this point to hit home. It says in verse 4, and then he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel he had around him. Simon Peter goes a little crazy for a couple of verses, basically you can't touch me, don't wash me like that. And Jesus is like, if I don't wash you, you're not clean. He's like, wash all of me. And Jesus is like, no, dude, just your feet. You're already clean in the other areas and stuff. So that's what's happening there. So this is what Jesus finishes up. We're going to be at verse 12. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right because it's true. And since I, the Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. How true is it that a servant is not greater than their master? Nor are messengers more important than the one who sends them. You know these things now. Do them. It's the path of blessing. It's the path of blessing. So we see Jesus speak from compassion. You know what's interesting is right after he washes their feet and they continue with the supper, it's the third occurrence that's written in the scriptures where the disciples are arguing about who's greater at the table. Every spiritual gift that you've been given actually has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with what God wants you to serve others with. You know, it's really easy when we say spiritual giftings to think of just in church, but your strength, your strategic leadership in the business place is your anointing. Anointing just means power of God. It is the power of God that's on your life for you to leave influence in your office and your business ventures that you're doing. Your ability to communicate with people, to make them feel seen and loved and heard, has nothing to do with you being able to get the sales from the extra gift cards or memberships. It has everything to do that God has wired you to connect with his children, to share his love. Your ability to make incredible cookies has nothing to do with your Pinterest boards or how great your Martha Stewart training is. It has everything to do to bring delight and nourishment as you host other people. You see, we get these postures, we get these gifts, and we think that it's to build our own empire. And Jesus is showing us, the King of Kings, the Master, and our leader, that the way to serve like him is to get on our feet and to get on our hands and knees and wash people's feet. It's a position of service. Jesus said the reason we're doing this with this series is because we want you to be successful in your life, in your relationships, and your leadership. And humility is the secret key. And so why humility? Because when you showcase humility, it leaves a lasting impact. We look at the symbol of the cross. During the time of Christ, when he was crucified, there were 3 different typical ways he would die, and the cross was the most humble way. In fact, when someone saw a cross, they saw weakness. But what do we see now? We see freedom. We see power, right? We see authority when it comes to the cross. Literally, Jesus and his sacrifice transformed the most horrific way to die into a symbol of power. Jesus' lifestyle of leadership has transformed our culture. Even just a few years after his time, we see Marcus Aurelius, which was a general in the Roman army. He was not saved. In fact, he is credited at killing many, many martyrs for Jesus, killing people just simply because they were a Christian. But he had learned the art of humility through the life of Jesus and the impact that he had. That Marcus Aurelius literally had someone walk behind him, right behind his shoulders, and whispered, "You're just a man. You're just a man." We see Simon Sinek, a social psychologist of our time. He wrote a book a couple years ago called Leaders Eat Last, and the power of literally leading your people and caring more about them getting their needs and getting them the goal, or explaining what the why is, will make the impact of greater leadership. Jacko Wilenicki, I would say his name wrong. Turns out he's not a Marine. According to my husband, he's a Navy SEAL, which whatever. Just kidding, it's not a whatever. I want to get it right. But Jacko, he talks about the phrase is that total ownership, right? What is it? Extreme ownership. Thank you for the handsome guy in the second row. It's my husband. Extreme ownership, okay? Jacko talks about that a good leader, a humble leader, owns all of the failure, right? He takes it on. Because he takes on for the team and the importance of that, of not putting it off on the players in your team that may have made a mistake. Like at the end of the day, if you own it, that's the humble posture. I think about an example of my spouse, actually. He hates it when I call him out all the time, but I can't help it. In 2014, he was deploying for his last deployment to Afghanistan. You see, Daniel, he enlisted after 9/11 and had been on several other deployments where some really horrific things happened. He buried many leaders and many brothers of his. He would find himself in firefights that would last for days on end. They would march through towns into victory. Well, by 2014, the war had changed quite a bit. And now, as he's deploying as a first sergeant in this position, he's paired up with a brand new lieutenant, his first deployment. And this guy is excited. He's excited to punch his card and his first time to go and serve. And you know, for military people, we understand that you enlist, you join the military to serve, to do something of value, right? To give back to your country. So there's no shame in this mindset. But the problem was this young lieutenant kept trying to put the soldiers in harm's way. The mission was not about, busting in doors. It was about winning the hearts and minds, this particular mission that they were on. And so Daniel, in humility, kept having to say, "Sir, that's not the best way to do this. We need to do this direction." And he kept getting second-guessed in front of everybody time and time again. And unfortunately, on that deployment, there was a soldier that was lost because of pure ignorance, because of wanting to be in a spot for things to pop off. And when they came back, after a long season of rejection, that lieutenant cornered my husband in the bathroom and said, "I just wanted to prove to my dad that I was a good leader. Because of you, we came alive, not because of my leadership. Thank you." Humility doesn't always win the praise, right? Humility can sometimes be the long, narrow road of suffering. But humility is the only posture when it comes to caring about others and caring about the mission above your own accolades and goal. You know, all of these things in our life, it all changed because of how Jesus lived and who Jesus is to us. You know, last week, Pastor Joel was talking about Jim Collins in the book Good to Great. We can see that humility guarantees results. In the Good to Great book, Jim Collins shares the story about a longitude study of businesses to see how successful businesses, like what were the key attributes. And the one key correlating attribute was the leaders were humble. And the ones that had a failure had major pride issues. And so we see even in business that humility sets us up. If you're in this room and you are in a dating or married relationship and you're struggling right now, well, you're like most people in relationships. Relationships are difficult. If you postured yourself to serve your spouse, maybe read the book Love Dare, right? And just go all out and serve your partner, I guarantee your relationship will improve. My small group these last couple weeks, we went over the 5 love languages. And I recently was reminded that, you know, we don't all speak the same love language. Your spouse, in most cases, usually speaks the opposite language of you. And on the offshoot that you both have the same love language, which I'm just going to go over them real quick just in case you don't remember what they are, the 5 love languages. We receive five different ways. 1, acts of service, which is such a great love language. You know, like emptying the dishwasher, picking the kids up from school, that kind of stuff, mowing the lawn. Another one is gifts. It could be something as random as a card, just thinking about you kind of a thing, with a little chocolate bar, I don't know, or it could be a new Tiffany's necklace. You choose. Gifts. Physical touch. You know what I'm talking about. It could be a hug, handshake, or the whole ordeal. I don't know. Another one is quality time, sitting and giving someone your whole undivided attention. And then finally is words of affirmation. You look really nice today. I really love how you did that parenting call. I saw how you really listened and were with your friend in that moment when we had a place to be. You're awesome. Those are the 5 love languages. If you spent a little bit of time figuring out what your partner's love language is and began speaking it and serving them, that's humility. It's putting them above yourself, serving them with your power and your strength. Your marriage, your relationship will transform, I promise you. Parenting. Woo! You know, growing up, I always thought like marriage and kids were just like what you do in life. It's exciting stuff. Like I dreamed of the day for the Christmas card. I didn't know that Christmas cards are like a thing from hell. Like to organize all the haircuts, to get people to wear clothes they don't want to wear, and smile for like pay God's awful amounts of money just to show a picture that your family, everyone's growing and you're still together, right? Why do we do this to ourselves? It's so expensive and miserable, but we do it because they look so cute up there, and you just forget that you were screaming at your spouse on the way there, and your kids are so irritating. But, you know, parenting, nothing has made me more humble in life than parenting because, you know, apparently if you don't raise your kids the way that you were raised, they don't respond the way you do in certain situations. And, you know, God knew that I needed some humbling, and so he gave me this firecracker of a child. This child is incredible. They are going to change the world. You just wait. We can all like say, we knew them. But I have this child that struggles with self-regulating. Currently reading this book called Good Inside. And this book it's a new social psychology book on parenting. And it says that the best thing we can give our kids is not a financial inheritance. It's not even a great education. It's teaching them how to self-regulate. That they will have a good life. They will enjoy their life the most if they can learn to self-regulate. And so this child of mine that's had a journey with self-regulating, there was a season when we would literally be in the lobby and they would just start screaming between services or after service. At one Sunday, they bit me in the face in front of a bunch of people, right? I got to tell you what my pride wanted to say. I am on staff at a church, and that's not a good look. How are people going to listen to me for spiritual guidance if you can't even obey me? It got to the place that when I'd pick them up from preschool, they would literally just run outside and say, I hate you, Mom. I hate you so much, and would kick and scream. Listen, I'm not claiming to be a perfect mom, but I'm a good mom. And I love my child, and I had no idea what was going on in my child's life. And this one particular day, I'm driving to the school, and I'm like, God, I just can't do it. He's like, great, what are we going to do then? I'm like, I don't know. You can do something? Like, help. And he's like, yeah, this child is embarrassed that everyone's staring at them when they're leaving the school. And they feel abandoned every time you drop them off. So this particular day, when they came running out and went to go kick me, instead of just kind of pushing them, herding them to the car, I scooped them up and I started whispering, I have missed you so much. This whole time you were gone, I've really missed you. And I know it's really embarrassing as everyone watches us when we leave. And instead of them going to hit me in the neck, they nestled their little head. And I realized all along, all they needed was someone to help affirm them in a moment that they felt uncomfortable. It's so easy as parents to go after the fruit of our kids' behaviors and activities instead of stopping and posturing ourselves in a position that goes, help me understand why you're responding this way. Perfect parenting doesn't produce perfect kids. Look at God. Adam and Eve were so screwed up. He was perfect. He is perfect. Our job is to serve our children, to love who they are, the mission of God that's on their life. Because here's the thing, the times are changing, people, and they're going to need some spicy leaders up in here that are willing to stand up for what's right and what's wrong. He needs people to stand in the gap regardless of what's going on, and those are the kids that we're raising. We are raising the next generation of leaders. It is our job to love them and serve them. I am not saying approve of negative behavior. And I'm not saying that your life's not important, but what I am saying is Jesus is asking us to approach our parenting through the lens of humility. Like, I opened our time sharing a story of how I learned to not start a job with pride and boasting, right? Letting everybody know what my accolades were, and instead come in low and slow. And Many of you may not know my story here at New Life, but in 2015, my husband Daniel and I were invited to join the staff of New Life and serve as the military ministry directors. And so, not knowing at the time, that I had a background in ministry and was a pastor, I just assumed that the military ministry director would eventually grow into a pastoral position. And so we accepted the jobs, and at the time, I didn't realize that our church did not believe in women in the role of pastors, to the point they didn't believe in women in leadership in the role on the board. And I had been a part of previous churches, like I said, and had been in ministry where that was our belief system. That was our interpretation of the scripture of the role of leadership, right? That God called us all. And so here we are in this position that we know God has called us here. He's called us to serve. And yet, because of my gender, simply because of my gender, there was going to be a glass ceiling. That regardless of what jobs or positions I was holding at the church, I would not make the same amount of money, and I wouldn't be given the title. I knew very clearly in this season of my life that this had nothing to do with me. This had nothing to do with me proving to anybody in this church or in this region of who I was and who I was made of. It was simply the journey that God had our church on. The journey that he had our senior pastor, Kirk Gilchrist, on. In fact, Kirk was here last service. He's like, you got to tell the real story, Daniela. You're holding back. So it feels a little cringy inside just sharing this, just to let you know. But literally, I would be at the coffee pot with my coworkers, and they're discussing their theological thoughts and opinions on women in ministry, and I'm standing right there. Like, to me, this isn't coffee talk, right? That time began to change, and things began to shift, and Pastor Kirk said, I couldn't deny the anointing on your life, and if there would have been arrogance, I wouldn't have been able to see that. But because you walked in humility, I began to see, oh, that's the role and the position of a pastor that she's doing. So it got to the place where we're like, okay, they're going to approach the board about this. And so they started putting me in positions as a pastor, but took the church a while to call me a pastor. And so Pastor Appreciation a couple years ago, they have all the pastors on staff, and there's 5 male pastors, there's myself. And so they're like, happy Pastor Appreciation Day to Pastor so-and-so, Pastor so-and-so, Pastor so-and-so, Pastor so-and-so, and Daniela. And I went home, I'm not going to lie, I bawled. It's hard. It's hard, right? If you've ever been in a spot where you have been limited or judged on the color of your skin, your socioeconomic standing, or your gender, you understand that it's hard. You can't change those things, right? And yet I knew God had us here because I saw the change, and I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to see it to fruition. But God began softening hearts. And by the spring of 2019, the board had agreed that they were going to begin to vote on women onto the board. It was incredible. And during this time, my husband gets a job offer as a campus pastor at a church in Cleveland, Ohio. And the Lord tells us, it's time to go. And so as I'm leaving, as Pastor Daniela, and women are starting to get voted on to the board, it's time for me to go. And part of that was hard, because I'm like, man, I've been here for all the bushes in the face. I want to be here for the good stuff too, Lord, to help walk this out. And God's like, it's not yours. I've got other women that I'm calling into that. And so we leave for Cleveland, and in life, in ministry or in work, you just kind of think, you go from accomplishment to accomplishment, right? You've been trained, you've grown, so now you've got a new capacity. And so I left, not with pride in my heart, but just, all right, God, you've grown my capacity in leadership, and I'm ready to step into what's next. And so I assumed that would be in ministry, that once again in time of coming alongside and serving with my husband, that, my gifts would make room for me. That was just the natural flow and pace of life. And instead, I get invited to this big women's conference, and they said, we just would love for you to be the MC. We think you would do great at that. It'd be a great time for the women of our church to get to know you. And so would you do that? I'm like, yeah, of course. I'd love to serve like that. And so it gets to the day of the women's conference, and I get a text that morning, sorry, there's not room for you on the stage. And I hear the Holy Spirit whisper, are you still going to go? Are you still going to go and serve? It's like, yeah, Lord, I'm still going to go. My eyes might be a little puffy, but I'm still going to go. So then a little bit later down the road, they're like, hey, we've got this Freedom Weekend coming. It's a deliverance weekend. We would love for you to come and speak at one of the breakout sessions. Can you do that? And then you can serve on the prayer team and walk people through prayer. Can you do that? And I'm like, yeah, of course, I would love to do that and help serve alongside that. Yeah, I would love that. And then I show up day of, and they said, you know what, actually, we just need you to go serve pizza. Not even the prayer, just serve in the cafe and the pizza. And so I showed up, and I served pizza. And I remember at the end of that day, I came home and I told my husband, I said, I just don't think there's a space for me here to serve in this capacity. And Daniel's like, well, it doesn't mean you get a hall pass to not serve anymore. I'm like, I know, but where should I serve? I'm serving in my marriage. I'm serving in my home with my kids. I'm serving in my neighborhood. But I feel like there's a spot that I'm supposed to be pouring out to in addition to that. And this opportunity came up at this women's shelter to serve dinner, a Sunday night dinner. And it was an incredible time that we got to serve at this women's shelter, that their children got to stay with them. And all of a sudden, the reality of we get to show these women, we get to make them, number one, a meal that's really good, that's made with so much love. One night we got to do these root beer floats. I felt like, God, because the budget was so small. I'm like, God, what do you do for dessert when you've got $20 for 200 women? And I heard the Holy Spirit say, root beer floats. I'm like, oh my gosh, that'd be perfect, because the ice cream jug's really big, and then you can get the Dollar Tree root beer and whatnot. And so we make these root beer floats, and there's this old lady, she's in her 50s, and she's bawling, and she's giggling at the same time as she's dipping her ice cream in it. And she's like, I haven't had one of these in years. This other mom comes to the line, and she's got tears in her eyes. She's like, I've never been able to get my child a root beer float, and I've always wanted them to experience this. I'm so excited for them to be able to have root beer floats tonight. And so the next month comes, I'm like, okay, God, how do we top root beer floats? What can we do? And I'm walking through Costco. It's like a Sam's Club, and they have these bouquet of flowers, and I literally have $17 left. I'm like, I'm going to get that 24-pack of roses. And so I'm like, I don't have vases. I guess the red Solo cups are going to have to do, right? And so we get these roses, and we cut them down, and we put these little bouquets on the table, and we look out, and we see these 20-year-olds taking a selfie with the roses. The older women are smelling them. Their noses are inside the rose. The little kids are picking the petals off because they've never seen a fresh rose. I found my sweet spot. Instead of buying all these books and studying to prep for sermons, my heart was postured. I want to have a ready word. The next time I'm going to walk with a friend or my husband's in a moment, I want to be able to have a word to encourage them, to be able to speak life into them. If I ever get to preach again, if that ever comes back, great. But I want to be equipped for right now. I can honestly tell you I found contentment. And it was in that place that Pastor Joseph Gilchrist called me and said, hey, Daniela, I've accepted the position as the lead, the senior pastor in a new life, and I would love for you to prayerfully consider coming back on my executive team. I share this story to you not to toot any horn, but to tell you that when you walk in humility, God will open doors further than your education, further than your personality, and further than your life experience will ever open for you. When you make sure that you live your life a service unto the King of Kings, all of a sudden everything you do becomes ministry, and it becomes every opportunity for the glory of God to enter into earth through you. Andrew Murray says this perfectly. It's so beautiful. He says, his humility, his being Jesus, became our salvation, and his salvation is our humility. I know some of you here today, you are new to your relationship with Jesus. You are new to walking with Jesus. And so you're very aware of what Jesus has rescued you from. But to my brothers and sisters that have been doing this for a while, I want to remind you that but for the grace of God, you are standing here. Your life could have turned out all sorts of different ways. But because you've chosen Jesus, there's a grace that covers you. Nothing postures our hearts more open to humility than gratitude, as we're recognizing it's not ours. And so, since humility is more caught than it is taught, we're going to spend one more time around, and we're going to sing the song Gratitude, so we can think about all that we're grateful for, all that God's done. And I want to encourage you to step out in humility this week. Thank you.